Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018, 10:01. Story 1, Fairy Fruit. All the neighborhood kids knew Ms. McKinley was a witch. It was a playground truth whispered with such conviction and all that didn't dare think to question it. Ms. McKinley, you know? The witch. Old ladies were supposed to be grandmothers and give out hard candies and sit inside knitting all day. Not live alone, in decrepit old cottages overgrown with ivy, with only the stray cats and crows for company. And they were definitely not supposed to live in graveyards. Cemetery, my mother would correct me. And she's not a witch, she's the groundskeeper. You wouldn't want anything to happen to Grandad, would you? Still weird to live beside a bunch of dead people, I'd mumble under my breath. Never mind, our house was so close I could see the headstones from my bedroom window. But kids never like the truth when the truth is too mundane. We wanted to believe that Ms. McKinley would dig up old bones to scry with, whatever scrying was. That any missing cats had ended up in her cauldron. That she'd eaten the last little boy who dared to wander through her garden. That one especially sparked our imaginations. Every other kid claimed it was their cousin's friend's neighbor's brother, whose name always seemed to change with each new telling. Some days it was Jimmy, others it was Tom, and once I swore I heard he was called Harris. But one thin fact always stayed the same: he had gone into Miss McKinley's garden and never came out again. Perhaps it was that pretend touch of danger that tempted us to make a game out of going in. It was Lizzie who suggested the idea. Lizzie wasn't exactly our leader, we didn't need a leader, and we weren't exactly friends. But there's only so many kids your own age within walking distance. Lizzie was one of them, and as the tallest and the loudest her ideas often ended up counting the most. I, like an idiot, spoke up. What if she catches us? We'll get in trouble. Lizzie barked out a laugh. What? You scared of the witch? No. My mum said witches don't even exist, I spat back. I didn't believe her. But Lizzie didn't need to know that. Then you've got no reason not to go, right? I bit down on my cheek. Damn it, she tricked me. Either I was scared of a witch, or I was scared of a little old lady, and neither was an acceptable option. All I'd managed to do was get myself nominated. Fine, then. The way I walked down the narrow road to Miss McKinley's side of the graveyard, you'd think I was being led to my own execution. Nervous energy fizzled under my skin like lightning in a bottle, as I made myself sick imagining all the hundreds of millions of ways this could go horribly wrong. But it was too late to back out now. If there's one thing worse than a coward, it's a cowardly quitter. The cottage sat on the edge of grounds, just off the street and right beside the front gates. I suppose it was her duty to lock up at night, not that it'd do much good. The wrought iron would be easy enough for hoodlums and teens to scale. Liz gave us all a leg up and then pushed herself over in one go. From there, a thin short hedge was all that separated us from Miss McKinley's garden. It was a sprawl of overgrown grass, filled with wildflowers and weeds. Not that it wasn't well tended to in its own way, she clearly liked to grow her own fruits and vegetables. My mouth glistened at the sight of strawberries, and I had to remind myself that food from a witch is probably poison. Lizzie nudged me. Dare you to grab one? Why? She cracked her toothy grin. You want a trophy, don't you? I'd have been happy to get out of there with all my fingers and toes and skin still on my bones. But I nodded anyway. Whatever got Lizzie to shut up and get on with it. The buzz of excitement faded away, as the group all held its breath in anticipation. And then I was running, leaping across the hedge, catching my foot on the way down. My hands in the dirt, pushing myself back up before I'd even finished stumbling. Every moment in here was another chance to get caught. I darted across the grass, kicking up dandelions as I went. I needed to grab something. Not the strawberries, they were too close to the window. More chance to be seen, more chance to get eaten. Something else, there. A bush of gleaming blood-red berries in the far corner. I sprinted towards them, arm outstretched, grabbed a fistful, and turned. I could see Lizzie and the others now, quietly cheering me on. I was so close, so close. My aching limbs loosened up with relief. And then a shadow passed across the window. I stopped dead. Had she seen me? She had to have seen me. But if she saw me, why wasn't she coming out? She should be coming out. What are you doing? Hurry up. I was running again. Fumbling over the hedge, not stopping till I reached the wrought iron of the fence that marked freedom. I leaned against the flaking paint of the bars, beginning to feel the burn of a stitch in my side. The others crowded around me, howling and hollering, but it all seemed so faint when I could still hear my heartbeat hammering inside me. Miss McKinley had seen me, and I didn't know which possibility was worse. A creepy old witch who could curse me. Or a little old lady who could tell my parents. We'd walked a little ways away from the graveyard before I made up some excuse about needing to head home. Instead, I circled back to the McKinley cottage. This time I came up the front path, dragging my feet like stone all the way. The door glided open before I even had a chance to knock. I don't know what I expected when I saw Miss McKinley. Of course I'd seen her before, but never up close. Never like a person. Her skin was creased like a well-loved book and she wore her hair rebelliously long and loose for a woman her age. She wasn't how I imagined her, or thought I'd imagine her, but as soon as the image settled in my mind I couldn't picture her any other way. She looked down at me with cold, curious eyes, and any hope I had that she hadn't really seen me fizzled out like a candle. I didn't say anything. I just held out the clump of berries sheepishly. "Sorry," I muttered, wishing I could disappear into the neck of my too-warm jumper. She plucked the clutch of berries from my hand and held them up to the light, inspecting them like a jewelry and diamonds. "Didn't think you'd come back," she said. She slipped the berries into her skirt pocket, before eyeing me up and down. "You're Philip's granddaughter, aren't you?" I momentarily forgot my fear. "You knew Granddad?" Her face softened into an almost smile. "Only a little. Good man, always tipped his cap whenever he came to see his wife. Your mother still brings him flowers every other month." A pang of dread rattles around inside me at the mention of my mum. I stare down at my sneakers. "Are you gonna tell her? Tell your?" "Ha." She starts laughing, a hearty rasp that reminds me of the cackle of a crow. "Girl, I was never gonna tell your parents. Getting sick off fairy fruit would have been punishment enough. But since you brought it back, I think we can call things even. Fairy fruit? The berry." She patted her pocket indicatively. "Makes a person awfully sick if it's not properly prepared. You can't eat it off the bush, but it does make a tasty jam. I made a batch the other day, if you'd like to try some." I nodded automatically. Maybe out of politeness, maybe out of fear, I don't know. But that was all it took for her to lead me inside, through the hallway, into a cozy kitchen with gauzy curtains and mismatched cookery lining the walls. This was the home of a witch? I sat myself down at the table, continuing my in-depth analysis of Miss McKinley's home decor, until a slice of sponge cake was placed in front of me. It was spread with juice red jam that threatened to trickle down the sides in thick, gleaming globs if not gobbled up fast enough. Miss McKinley took a seat opposite of me, folding her hands on the table expectantly. "Enjoy," she said. I lifted up the cake, trying my best to keep my fingers away from the ever-sticky jam, and took a single cautious bite. And then another. And another. Until the generous slice has disappeared entirely. It tasted achingly sweet in my mouth. As smooth and rich as you imagine the wildest berry to be. As deliciously forbidden as sips of wine stolen on New Year's. "I already wanted more you like that." Miss McKinley chuckled. I nodded, licking away a swirl of jam that had spilled down my chin. A wave of self-consciousness ran across my skin as I tried to recompose myself. "So why is it called fairy fruit?" It's a question that makes her eyes light up. She pulled the berries out her pocket, holding them out for me to see. "See the leaves?" I did. Each one had 5 gangly points, making it resemble a little person with a head and arms and legs. Beware the men who grow from roots and never eat their fairy fruits. Sorry? Do you read much folklore? I gave a soft shrug. Maybe I had a copy of the Brothers Grimm under my bed somewhere, but that was about it. Well, in the old stories it's bad luck to eat the food of the fae. Fairies, that is. The humans that do usually end up getting trapped in fairyland or get eaten themselves. So when people discovered the strange berries that look like little people make you sick, they simply assumed it was a fairy curse. I nodded along thoughtfully. It made enough sense. And then a thought spilled out of my sticky, jammed up mouth before I could stop it. Do you know a lot about curses? She titled her head to the side curiously. Now what makes you say that? I mean, it's not, never mind, because you kids all think I'm a witch. I'm pinned to my seat. My face perfectly placid, while underneath I'm bubbling with fear. She stares down at me, an unreadable expression, until I realize she really is waiting for an answer. Well, I managed to choke out, "Are you?" And then she laughs. Long, and hard, and longer still, until even my relief turns tepid. "At least you're honest, girl," she finally says. "No, I don't ride a broomstick, or dance with the devil, or anything like that. I'm just a simple old woman who keeps to herself and her garden. And lives in a graveyard." I clamped my hand over my mouth a moment too late. A coy smile worked its way onto the corner of her mouth. "That too. But don't you ever get creeped out?" She gave her head a soft shake. "You know, your grandfather was a good man. It'd be strange to think any less of him just because he's in the ground." I stared down at the table. I could feel an unpleasantly itchy pang of guilt crawl up through me. "Miss McKinley, I'm sorry. You already said sorry once, girl. Don't say anything you mean more than once. No, not just for the berries. I'm sorry, I thought you were a witch." She smiled at me. "You come say hi whenever you like, dear. I could use the company. Keep your nose clean, and I promise I won't curse you." And then a wink at me. I walked home that day a little brighter, a little bolder. And the sweet taste of fairy fruit still lingering in my mouth. I wasn't scared of Miss McKinley after that. If I saw her on our way to visit Grandad's grave, I'd give a wave no matter how far away. On some slow days when there was no one to play with, I'd wander over to her cottage and sit in her kitchen a while, learning bits of folklore I'd never find in the books under my bed and happily eating fairy fruit cake. She'd tell me more about fairies, real fairies, cruel fairies, not the dainty kind in flower-petal dresses found on postcards. About their weakness for iron, the secrets of their names, the way they'd twist the truth into knots on their tongues to make up for the fact they can't lie. "You'll never get a straight answer out of a fae," she said, once. "Always dodging questions. Sometimes the words you don't say are more important than the ones you do." I enjoyed that. Little bits of knowledge, however pointless, that gave me more power. A new way to see the world. The cake was nice, too. But what soured the taste was the days I didn't see Miss McKinley. When I slipped back into old patterns and found myself playing with my maybe friends. She didn't come up all that much, but when she did I took note of every whisper and snicker and jeer wrapped around her name. She didn't deserve it. Any of it. Annoyance started to buzz under my skin like an ugly itch, and it didn't take long for me to scratch it. It was a summery day when the hazy heat was making us bored and sluggish. It was Lizzie who started it, of course. It was always Lizzie. We could see what mental old McKinley is up to. "I heard Janine Davies' cat hasn't come home since. Leave her alone, Liz." She turned to me. "What? She's not harming anyone. Let's just do something else. Since when are you scared of the weird old witch?" An indignant spark roared up inside me. "I'm not," I muttered. "Too. Am not. Not." And then an idea snapped into my head. Behind it was a trickle of guilt, but it was easy to drown it out under all my anger and pride. "Fine," I said. "I'll prove it." Without another word I turned and walked away. Down the narrow road to Miss McKinley's side of the graveyard, all the while vaguely aware the others were following bewilderedly behind. There was no hiding this time, no clambering over fences to avoid perfectly fine front gates. I walked right up the front path and knocked, the way I would if this were a visit on any other day. As soon as I thumped my fist on the painted wood of the front door, I heard the scuffle of scattering feet, the group rushing to seclude themselves in the safety of shadows and trees. Miss McKinley didn't seem surprised to see me. She never did. For a moment, I felt that same flicker of guilt fizzle up inside me. Here I was, exploiting the unearned reputation I hated to make myself look better. But I couldn't let them call me a coward. "Sorry, Miss McKinley." "Hello, dear," she said brightly. She peered over my shoulder curiously. "Are your friends not going to join us?" "No." I didn't ask how she knew they were there. I simply slipped inside and let her close the door behind me. A little while later I emerged from the cottage again, this time carrying a box of fairy fruit cakes. "For your friends," Miss McKinley had said with a wink. As soon as I was past the graveyard gate I was swarmed, the center of a mass of grasping hands and awestruck eyes. "You actually went in there. What was it like? Are you crazy?" I tried to give my most casual shrug. I was already struggling to keep the proud grin off my face. There's nothing scary about what I'd done, but they didn't need to know that. My eye caught Lizzie, leaning back against the fence and projecting to the whole world how much she didn't care. I stared up at her. "Told you I wasn't scared." She looked at me all dark and stony, her eyes drifting down to the box. "What's that you got there?" As if she couldn't see through the clear plastic. "Just some cakes from Miss McKinley." I gestured to the rest of the group. "Want one?" Lizzie scoffed. "How do you know they aren't poisoned?" There was a murmur across the group. A battle between hesitation and temptation. Well. I pried off the lid, reached in, and lifted one out to take a bite. "I've been eating plenty and I'm not dead, am I?" That was enough of an invite. One sticky hand reached in and took a cake, followed by another, and another, until everyone but Lizzie had had a taste of fairy fruit. "Liz," I said, holding out the last one. Her mouth was a tight, thin line as she eyed the cake. "What kind is it, anyway?" "Fairy fruit. She grows the berries that make the jam herself. And you think I wanna eat witchy food? Fine." I shoved it in my mouth before she had a chance to change her mind. She rolled her eyes and walked away, hands in pockets, but for a second I thought I saw a twitch of regret on the corners of her mouth. "So," Miss McKinley said, setting down 2 cups on the table. "Tea for her, hot chocolate for me. Did your friends enjoy the cakes?" I nodded. "Everyone except Liz. She's just so, she doesn't want anyone to do anything except what she tells them. It's so annoying." She tilted her head sympathetically. "Some people are just immature. She'll never be a grown-up if she doesn't learn to act like one." "Cake, dear?" I nodded again, maybe a little too vigorously. Miss McKinley rose up to retrieve her jam and sponge from the cupboard. I was still sat at the table, sipping my drink and swinging my legs, when the gangly shadow flicked across the window. I shot round to look, a splash of hot chocolate hitting my dress as I turned. The garden was empty, the trespasser gone, but a telltale trail of trampled grass led to the fairy fruit bush and back. I bolted up. "Miss McKinley, I think, leave it, pet. Some people need to learn a lesson the hard way." The next time I saw Liz she looked thinner, paler. She didn't seem to tower over the rest of us as much. In the back of my head, I wondered if it was sickness from eating fairy fruit. Good, I thought. That'll teach her. But a day of tiredness and lethargy soon turned into a week. She was speaking less, standing back more, fading from the group like a shadow scattering under cloud cover. Soon there were days where she didn't come outside at all. I asked her about it at school, once. She shrugged from across the lunch table, too busy pulling the crust off her uneaten sandwich to even look up. "Just don't feel like playing much, getting too old for it, you know." I tried to nod convincingly, sympathetically. I didn't know, not really. But it seemed like the polite thing to do. "How come you're not eating?" She shrugged again. "Just not hungry." "Hey, did McKinley give you any more of those cakes?" I shook my head and pretended not to see the way her shoulders drooped with genuine dismay. It turned out there wouldn't be any more fairy fruit for me either, afraid the plants withered up. Pet, Ms. McKinley told me the next time I came over. She pointed out the window to where the fairy fruit bush once grew. Now there was only a path of empty earth, as fresh as a newly dug grave. Fairy fruit can be fickle like that. I don't even know if it'll be back next year. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss it. But not as much as Lizzie, I bet. After all, she only got the one taste. I never got the chance to tell her, or even time to decide if I should, because that's when she disappeared from school. First it was just a day. Then a second, a third, but by the end of the week our teacher announced Lizzie was in the hospital. Something about not getting enough nutrition. We scribbled cards in class and waited eagerly for the return of the bold, brash Liz, hopefully with hospital stories and maybe a scar. But the weeks passed into months, and the weather turned grey, and all our morbid curiosity died away as we realized Lizzie wasn't getting better. I went to see her once. Just once. In books and stories they always say sick people look like ghosts. Lizzie didn't look like a ghost. Lizzie looked dead. The girl who once stood like a sunflower in a field of weeds now lay back on a bleached white pillow, little more than a gauzy skeleton. Her lips were cracked like crumbling dust and I could see the blue of her veins pulse weakly under her pale skin. She didn't talk. I don't think she could talk. And maybe that's for the best. What do you say to someone who's obviously going to die? Lizzie didn't make it till spring. She was buried in a grave so far up the hillside I could see it from my bedroom window. I kept my curtains closed for a long, long time. Some months later, when the last of the slush had melted, my mum took me on one of her regular visits to Grandad's grave. She didn't stop me when I slipped away, wandering my way up the hill. I don't know if I wanted to see Lizzie, but it felt like I had to. As I worked my way through the rows of mismatched headstones, a figure came into view. Kneeling over a grave, with gloves and hat and trowel in hand. A figure I now knew even from afar. "Ms. McKinley, they never tell you about the weeds," she called out, as I kept coming closer. She didn't seem surprised to see me. She never did. Good earth makes for good weeds, even when there are bodies underneath. But maybe today we've got something even better. She looked so at ease with her hands in the earth, the new grass not even grown over. As I watched her, I remembered what Ms. McKinley said about fairy folk. How you'll never get a straight answer out of them. I remembered how I asked her if she really was a witch. She gave me a list of all the witchy things she didn't do. But she never said no. With one tug, Ms. McKinley pulled something up. A tangle of roots, thin and fine, that seemed to go on forever. She wiped the glistening sweat off her brow. "Good news, there'll be plenty of jam this year." My stomach lurched. I could see the head she was holding now, gangly leaves of 5 and blood-red berries not yet ripe. Growing right over Lizzie's grave. Ms. McKinley gave me a dark, knowing smile. "You know, some people think fairy fruit is a bit bitter." She plucked a single berry and popped it in her mouth, but I think it's the sweetest fruit of all. Story 2, I think I fell for a romance scam. The emails started a year ago. They weren't quite as bad as usual spam. No ridiculous sender names, no weird fonts in the headlines. But the body of the email gave it away. "Hi Carolyn. Like you, we know what it's like to be lonely. Unlike you, we've found a solution. Lucky for you, we want to share. We've cracked the romance code. We can find a match for anyone, and in your case, we've already found it. Click here to meet your soulmate." I never clicked, because come on. Not that the idea itself wasn't appealing. I'm an awkward workaholic. Workaholism is a productive but intensely lonely state of being. Loneliness is suffocating. An invisible weeping wound that bleeds into every part of you like a slow, lethal poison. If you've never been lonely, I'm sure that sounds ridiculous. So for your sake, I hope you never get lonely. Lonely or not, the idea of meeting someone, of giving him the chance to judge and dismiss me before he even got to know me, was paralyzing. Even worse was the possibility of being used. And that was a justified fear. I was a superstar at work. I wasn't rich, But I was on the way. I owned my own house. I was smart, fit, cute, and self-made, the embodiment of self-fulfillment and success. But I was too scared to find a boyfriend. In my spare time, I buried myself in online communities. Astronomy, sailing, bookbinding, Disney. None of it went anywhere. New friends flaked on me, or I flaked on them. Male attention abounded, but none of it felt right. Meanwhile, those emails kept coming. And I kept getting lonelier. One night the email came through again, but with my own name as the sender. For some reason, I clicked the link. My computer screen turned white, then blue. I swore up a storm. Great. Just fucking great. I'd ruined my computer, compromised every bit of personal information, and for what? The screen turned black. Slowly the darkness brightened, resolving into a room. Even through the poor quality stream, I could tell it was magnificent, gleaming golden walls, marble floors, and a series of breathtaking arches in the background. In the foreground was a painfully mundane office chair and a sliver of wooden desk. Footsteps echoed, slapping on the marble. Then a man slid into the chair. My heart constricted so fiercely it hurt. He was beautiful, literally, almost androgynous, with well-placed fine lines that enhanced the sharp elegance of his face. Dark-eyed and light-haired, with a nervous, excited smile that rendered me speechless. "Hello," he said. "Sorry. I didn't check." He broke off. Looking at him made it impossible to think, so I focused on the background. On that magnificent room. Only it wasn't magnificent anymore. If anything, it was the opposite, bland cream walls hung with art reproductions and a Timco frog sculpture. I saw a platform bed and an uninspired nightstand in the background. "But I didn't care, madam," he said. "I don't know about you, but I'm so glad this wasn't a scam." I let myself look at him for an almost painful moment. Me too. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Not that it was a fairy tale. Adam had a degenerative illness that made work nearly impossible. In fact, his current assignment, a humanitarian mission in the Middle East, would be his last. He was waiting to go home, where he'd wither away with nothing and no one. Except me, of course. I should have known what I was dealing with. But Adam salved something in me. Breathed life into a part of me I didn't even know existed. And that was just through email and video chat. I could only imagine how wonderful he'd be in person. So when he asked for money, well, it was a no-brainer. Even when he asked repeatedly, someone stole my wallet and passport, was what he said the first time. The second time, my bank froze my account. I can't pay my mortgage or bills back home, and I can't pay for any equipment here. Customs was his third excuse. I ordered medical equipment for the outpost here, but customs wants so much money. I'll pay you when I get home. The fourth time, he said, I got hurt. I have to come home. I hate to do this, but can you wire me enough money for a ticket? I did. He asked. I'd have done anything for Adam, and anything to convince myself that the $27,000 I'd sent him wasn't in the pockets of a scammer. After that, he disappeared. No matter how often I called, messaged, emailed, nothing. Like he didn't exist. I gave up. Then, last Tuesday in the middle of the night, my phone rang. I scrambled for it and blinked blearily at the screen. Incoming video chat from Adam Sonder. My heart leapt into my throat, and I answered. For a second I thought I was seeing double. Then triple. Then quadruple, quintuple, on and on. Identical images, stretching backward in a straight line as far as I could see. But it wasn't Adam. It was a scrappy little brunette with enormous Sailor Moon eyes and a bleeding cut across her forehead. The video feed blacked out. Anger exploded inside me. I don't know what possessed me, but I went into my email and pulled up every message from that dating site. They hadn't sent a single one since the night I met Adam. I found it quickly, I'd archived it for posterity, and reread it. Then I clicked the link. My computer screen turned white, then blue, then black. Then it slowly faded in, showing a glitchy video feed of an enormous figure slumped against a colossal chair. No. Not a chair. A throne. A golden throne. The figure looked alarmingly tall. 7 feet, maybe even 8, and badly proportioned. My heart sped up painfully. All at once, the image became bright and crisp. To my immense relief, I saw that it wasn't a man, but some kind of wooden effigy. It was simultaneously primitive and oddly sophisticated. Long auburn hair fell from its scalp in shimmering sheets. An articulated jaw hung slack against its chest. Glass eyes gleamed from oversized sockets. They were wedged strangely so that one pointed upward, giving it a sunken, decayed look. The other stared straight ahead, bright blue flecked with gold. Gleaming robes cascaded from its broad shoulders, embellished with symbols wrought in golden thread. The ermine lining shone like snow in moonlight. It looked like a king. A wooden king on a precious throne. A deep rattle exploded from the computer speakers. I jerked back, screaming, as the effigy's chest rose and fell. Its head lolled against its chest, falling against one shoulder in such a way that its sunken eye fixed on me. It breathed, this giant automaton, wet and sick as a pneumonia patient. I slammed my computer shut. For the second time that night, my phone rang. I grabbed it reflexively and saw the same notification. Incoming call from Adam Sonder. I answered. Hello? Just a second. Sorry about before. It was just a movie. Adam's familiar voice filled me with relief so intense my spine turned to jelly. I melted against my pillow and closed my eyes. Is it good? What? Oh, it's all right. Nothing special. The feed reappeared, and for a second I had the ridiculous impression that I was talking to a poorly wrapped mummy. Horror eclipsed my relief. Wound dressings covered Adam's face from nose to scalp. A spot of fresh blood bloomed in the gauze over his right eye. I ran into trouble. Got hurt pretty bad. His voice turned wet and rough. That's why I didn't call you. I wasn't sure if you. Pity, horror, and overjoyed relief battled in my heart. I could practically see them, glimmering billows of light struggling to overpower each other. Adam cleared his throat. I'd love to finally see you in person. But I don't look right anymore. Really not right. If you don't want to see me, I understand. Just like that, relief won out. Of course I want to see you. His face, the part of it I could see, anyway, looked stunned. Then he smiled. He bought me a plane ticket for the following Friday, then wired the $27,000 into my bank account. I was breathlessly ecstatic. Here it was, proof that he was real, that he cared about me, that I'd hit the romantic jackpot. That euphoria wasn't quite enough to silence my doubts, but it allowed me to ignore them. The next few days passed in a flurry of hysterical excitement. Then, as I was boarding the plane, I got a message from Adam. I had to go to the hospital this morning. I might not be home when you get there. Just in case, there's a spare house key inside the gnome. Can't wait to see you less than 3. I typed back, are you okay? Yeah. I have to go, but I'll see you soon. Have a safe flight. Doubt poisoned my euphoria, but I'd come too far. So I got on the plane. Adam lived in a small home on a cliff overlooking the beach. There were no other homes for miles. It looked like a forgotten dollhouse, abandoned on the cliff by a careless or cruel child. I got out of the car and shivered as cold, wet wind swept over me. It was twilight. The sky was a breathtaking pale green shot through with veils of deep gray clouds. The sand spread below, an unusually pale expanse broken only by dark rocks. A garden gnome perched at the corner of the yard. I lifted it and saw a key gleaming dully against the grass. I picked it up and approached the house as rain began to fall. After a moment's hesitation, I placed the key in the lock. Light exploded from the windows, bright white gold flooding the yard. Under my hand, the knob turned. And the door opened. Adam stood there, smiling beautifully. The blood-spotted eye remained bandaged, but the rest of him was clear to see. My heart fell briefly. Painful-looking reams of scarred flesh spread from cheek to chin, and a nauseating patch of blistered flesh glistened like bubbles. His smile flickered. My heart clenched, then bounded right back up. I hugged him. He hugged me back and pulled me inside. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. The feeling was short-lived. Adam shut the door behind us. I blinked against the brightness, trying to pinpoint its source. It was impossible. It seemed to come from every wall, every corner. Sorry about the light. I never told you. I got scared of what you'd think, but there's no hiding it now. I'm a little afraid of the dark. He strode past. For an instant, I thought I was insane. There were dozens of him, a perfectly straight line of atoms diminishing in size as far as I could see. I realized I wasn't staring at a wall of lights. I was staring at mirrors. Every wall was paneled with mirrors. Some were vast panels with beveled edges. Others were charming, with old-fashioned flourishes. Some looked ancient, thick gilded frames etched with unfamiliar symbols. I didn't know what to think. Doubt pressed against me, heavier than ever, but I was here. He was real. We were together. So I lied. I'm afraid of the dark, too. Adam smiled again, face crinkling in a way that made his scars disappear. Uneasiness aside, it was a wonderful evening. He'd prepared supper, a veritable smorgasbord of incredible food, half of which I couldn't name. We talked for hours. Every word soothed my doubt a little more until I could pretend I'd never felt it at all. By that point, only the mirrors unsettled me. Every time I looked up I saw dozens of me, fading into the ether like a nightmare. But as the night wore on, as rain pounded, as wind shrieked, as liquor flowed and gave us the courage to explore each other, even mirrors faded into irrelevance. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke, everything was dark. I reached across the bed. The sheets were cool and empty, so I sat up. Adam wasn't there. Moon poured through the lone window, turning my skin to pale fire. I looked like a ghost, and so did my reflections, 100 increasingly tiny ghosts, disappearing in the false and endless distance. Something fell across me, a dark shape, a veil of darkness, turning my reflection from ghost to shadow. But only my main reflection, not the others. As I lay on the bed, open-mouthed, the darkness spread inside the mirror. My reflections panicked, screaming silently as they broke formation and scattered into a dimly glowing flurry. The darkness in the mirror grew, covering my remaining reflection in thick tendrils of shadow that billowed like silk scarves. I ran. The mirror shadows reared up and shot after me like a missile. I hurtled into the living room and froze. Something stood there, hunched against the ceiling. A humped, enormous figure with insane proportions, something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I retreated, painfully aware of the cold tile floor under my feet, and ran for the door. I reached for the knob and smacked against a mirror instead. I spun around and ran in the opposite direction, only to hit another mirror. As I watched, the shadow missile hit my reflection. No, not my reflection. A woman. A woman with dark hair and enormous eyes and a half-healed cut on her forehead. Her eyes found mine. "Help me," she mouthed. Cords stood in her neck. "Help me." The shadow split apart into breathtaking veils of darkness and wrapped the girl in its billowing tendrils. A particularly harsh blast of wind rocked the house. The shadow in the mirror faded. Small objects fell to the ground like rain. Shredded clothing, locks of hair, fingernails and the dull glitter of tiny lumps of metal. Fillings. Dental fillings. The remaining shadow seemed to rewind, a dark mist that spun backward on itself. Then it coalesced into a figure. Before I could see any more, the mirrors blazed to life. Blinding light, beautiful light, flooding the room and reflecting from the mirrors like fire. My eyes adjusted and I saw Adam. Adam, bandaged and scarred. Adam, who I already loved, standing in the middle of the room where the disfigured monster had been just seconds before. Please. His chest heaved wildly. Let me explain. I snatched my purse off the coffee table and ran out into the rain. I practically leapt into my car, ignoring Adam's pleas, and sped away. Only when I reached the first stoplight did I realize I was still naked. I pulled off on an abandoned stretch of beach and watched the stormy ocean. It's been hours. I haven't moved. I can't explain why. It's like I can't. Like I wasn't made to move. My phone's been ringing constantly. I've been ignoring it. A few minutes ago I got a text message. I made the mistake of reading it. I can explain. Please come back. I need you. I don't know why, but I want to listen. I want to go back. I want to know. At the very least, I should probably go back for my clothes. Story 3, I thought fish would be an easy pet for my son. Even though I thought Dave was too young to have a pet, I still took him to the pet store anyway. He had been begging me to get him a pet for a while, and since he had just recently turned 6, I thought it would make a nice birthday present for him, especially after dealing with the stress of the recent divorce. The only pet we had currently was a 7-year-old cat named Mitten. I took him to the fish section to look around, because I assumed a fish would make a good starter pet to teach him about responsibility. I showed him around the room, and none of the creatures in the tanks seemed to interest him. All of a sudden, he beamed with excitement and pointed at one of the shelves outside the tank room. "That!" he shouted. "I want that." On the shelf, alongside a bunch of tank ornaments, was a white bag with a picture of a grinning cartoon fish on it. The letters on the bag read Super Duper Fish. Below the main letters, it gave instructions on placing the magic eggs into the water, allowing the eggs to hatch into tiny fish that would grow. Assuming it was like those sea monkeys all of the kids my age were disappointed with, I grabbed the bag off the shelf, along with a tank, a filter, and decorations, and took them to the front desk to pay for them. After we got home, we set the tank up in Dave's bedroom. After adding the decorations, we dumped the eggs into the tank directly from the bag. I was surprised to see the eggs hatch instantly upon hitting the water, turning into small transparent fish larvae. I explained to Dave that he would have to feed them a dash of fish flakes every now and then, and warned him not to overfeed them. I also told him that we would have to clean the tank every month, but promised I would help him out with that. He didn't seem to be too worried about the responsibility or care. He was just so overjoyed to finally have his own pets, and I was happy for him. The first couple weeks were normal. The fish grew extremely quickly, reaching the size of Dave's fingers in just a week and a half. It wasn't until 3 weeks after our visit to the pet store that things became weird. I came into Dave's room one morning to wake him up for school, and noticed that Hissy, Dave's beloved stuffed snake who he normally slept with, was missing. I turned to the fish tank, and was surprised to see a mass of cotton floating on the surface of the water mixed with pieces of Hissy's fabric skin. I also noticed Hissy's bead eyes sitting on the bottom along with the tank pebbles. After using the fish net to scoop the cotton and fabric out of the tank, I asked Dave why he had done this to his favorite stuffed animal. His lip quivered, and tears appeared in his eyes, as if he was saddened to see Hissy dead. Before he replied, "The fishies did it." I assumed he was playing some sort of game as I threw away what was left of Hissy and got Dave ready for school. A few days later, as I prepared for work, I grabbed one of my shoes and stuck it on my foot, only to feel a gross wet squish inside. I looked inside my shoe, and saw the squashed remains of one of the fish from Dave's tank. I went to Dave's room and scolded him for this prank, less on my part and more because I felt sorry for the fish that had died. Dave denied having done anything, claiming that the fish got in my shoe all on its own. I scolded him further for lying to me, before going to the bathroom to clean out my shoe. Early the next morning, I went downstairs to the kitchen to get myself an early breakfast. The gruesome sight before me made me lose my appetite. Mitten, the cat that I had owned for 7 years, was lying dead on the kitchen floor. Her neck was broken, her eyes were missing, and her stomach was torn open with her entrails spilling out onto the floor. A trail of blood led upstairs to Dave's room. I screamed at Dave for hours and hours as he once again laid blame on the fish instead of himself. I decided that I would send him to therapy to take care of his little problem. Mitten's death aside, Dave's therapy sessions seemed to turn things back to normal for the next week. One night, I woke up to the sound of Dave screaming. I ran to his room, and my stomach churned when I saw that 4 of the fingers on Dave's left hand were missing, with blood dripping down onto the floor. The water in the fish tank was blurred red. Horrified, I begged him to tell me what had happened. Once again, he claimed the fish did it. Regardless of the actual cause, I dashed to my room and grabbed my cell phone to call 911. As I was talking on the phone, I heard a loud crash in Dave's room. I sprinted back, and saw the fish tank lying on the floor shattered into many pieces. The window was broken, and Dave was gone. I looked down, and saw one of the fish from the tank flopping on the floor, with a pink chunk of something in its jagged jaws. I bent down for a closer look. The chunk had the exact same color and texture as Dave's tongue. The police searched, but neither Dave nor the rest of the super-duper fish were ever found. I've always kept this story secret from everyone I knew personally. Whenever someone asks me what happened to my son, I tell them my divorced spouse took him. After all, if I didn't believe Dave when he warned me about the fish, why would anyone else believe me? Story 4, my doorbell camera caught something odd. I was at work the first time I got the notification on my phone. I glanced down at a staff meeting, glad for the distraction, and saw that I had a new message from my doorbell. I had installed one of those smart doorbells to make sure that no one was trying to steal packages or break into my house when I was at work. I was both terrified and excited to get my first message. I clicked play on the 10-second video. At first, there was nothing, and then I saw a bird land on my porch railing. A second later, a cat jumped up and grabbed it off the fence. The video cut out right after. I couldn't help but let an excited whoop in the meeting. My boss was not amused. Periodically, I got a message from my doorbell. Most of the time, it was nothing. A cop passing by. The mailman dropping off letters. Someone walking their dog. Every time it was nothing. After a week, I started dreading the videos sent from my doorbell. Always expecting something interesting but always being disappointed. That disappointment would soon evaporate when I started getting the night videos. I had been laying on the couch, watching TV and fighting sleep, when I felt my phone vibrate. I glanced down and saw the icon in the corner of the screen. I shook my head and then dropped the phone back down. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated again. I looked and saw that there was a 2 next to the icon. I glanced over at the front door. I hadn't heard anything and I was a few feet away. My phone buzzed again. The number 3 appeared. Curiosity got the best of me and I opened the first video. Like all of them, it was 10 seconds. For the first 8, literally nothing happened. I rolled my eyes and was about to shut off my phone when I saw what looked like light reflecting off of metal. Then it went to black. The reflection was enough to get me to look at the second video. Again, a few seconds of nothing and then what looked like movement near my railing. It sounded like something was in my bushes. Right before the 10 seconds ended, there was another reflection. I glanced up at the door and looked for any movement. Nothing. No sounds. No shadows. Nothing. I clicked play on the third video. Again, nothing for a second until another crunch of a footprint. Then it looked like a figure moved away from the camera. The weirdest thing, though, was the sound it made. It was a low, almost whisper level, cicada chittering. At least, that's what it sounded like. I walked over to my door as quiet as can be and put my ear to the wood. I could barely make out what was going on, but I was hoping I'd catch something. Had there been a doorbell camera on me at the moment, I'd look like a fucking weirdo. I pulled my ear off the door, having heard nothing, but then my phone vibrated in my pocket. Another video from the doorbell. I couldn't play it where someone might see the light, so I pocked my phone and crawled along the floor away from the door. Once behind the safety of the wall, I opened my phone and tapped on the video. There was nothing and then a long shadow cast across the light. It was a person. I couldn't see but it looked like it had been hunched down at the same time I was. The only thing that separated me from whatever was outside my door, was a thin piece of wood. I made an executive, some might think stupid, decision and dashed up and flipped on my porch light. I was half expecting to get another video but it never came. All I heard was that faint chittering and then everything was silent. I waited for over an hour, constantly glancing down at my phone, but I never got a message. I assumed whatever was outside my door was gone. I took a breath and grabbed the door handle. I slowly twisted it and pushed it open. Nothing was there. Not even a cat. I shook my head and was about to head back inside and lock the door when something near the railing caught my eye. It shimmered in the porch light. It was near my bushes. I walked over there and looked down to see a small necklace with a tiny locket. Inside was the picture of a young couple. There was a name etched into it, maybe Parson or Parsum, but I couldn't make it out because it was crisscrossed with scratches. It wasn't worth much, more sentimental value than real worth, but it did confirm my suspicion that someone had been there. I scooped it up, went back inside and locked all my doors and windows. Before I went off to bed, I went online and ordered another doorbell camera for my back door. As I slid under the covers, I swore I heard a soft chittering from outside my window, but I can't be sure. I might have been dreaming. The next day at work, I found myself looking at my phone, hoping for another video. Was the person going to come back to look for their necklace? Each time I saw a new video pop up, it was more of the same. Nothing exciting. Cat, postman, dog walker. Boring. Later that night, I was reading a book when my phone vibrated. Another video. I glanced up at the clock, it was near midnight. Outside my window, I heard the chittering again. They were back. I jumped up and quietly made my way to the front door. I pulled out my phone and waited for it to buzz. I didn't have to wait long. I opened the video and saw a long shadow cast on my porch. No one moved into the frame and I found myself pleading with the figure to do so. I wanted to get a look at who this was. Part of me thought of grabbing a bat and walking outside, but my lizard brain told me that was dumb. Another buzz. This time, I didn't need the video. There was a crash at my door and what sounded like a hand dragging across it. I swallowed hard and suddenly realized that maybe I didn't want to look at the video. The chittering came again, it was louder than before. There was another crash at my door and the chittering intensified. My phone buzzed. Another video. I pocketed it and looked over for something I could use as a weapon and only saw throw pillows. I looked down at my fists and sighed. They weren't going to do jack shit. The cicada noise was so intense now, that it started to warp my field of vision. It was having an effect on me. I put my hands over my ears and crawled away from the noise. The further I got from the clamor, the clearer my head became. I clicked on the video and was surprised to see the figure of a man lurching into frame. The night vision of the doorbell camera made his eyes look black and lifeless. He moved in a herky-jerky fashion, like maybe he had been drinking. In the video, he raised his hand to hit the door but it looked off. It was a fist, maybe. Right before he hit the door, the video ended. Just then, I heard a tapping on the window next to me. I put my hand over the phone screen and slouched all the way down to the ground. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the outline of the man. I don't think he was lost or confused. I think he looking for a weak point to enter. In my head, I was trying to remember if I locked all my windows. There is nothing in the world scarier than realizing someone might break into your house and hurt you because you had been too lazy to lock a window. The man dragged his hand along the glass, which afforded me a better look at it. It looked white, like he was wearing a glove. He had to be, he wasn't leaving fingerprints on the glass. He moved on and I slowly followed along with him. Just then, I heard the chittering and stopped. I wanted to keep my thoughts in case he was, I don't know, casting a spell or something. I'll admit it sounds dumb but I didn't want to take any chances. Just then, my phone buzzed. Rear door doorbell camera had a new video. I clicked on it and saw the man at my back door. His head was constantly swaying, I couldn't get a good view, but he was obviously looking for something. I heard a smash from my backyard and hustled over to a window. I peeked out of the blinds, praying he wouldn't be staring back at me, and searched for the sound of the noise. The man had zigzagged across my backyard and knocked down my charcoal grill. The ashy dust seemed to cling to him as he moved around the yard. What was odd, was that it didn't stick to his legs. Or, if it did, I didn't notice it. The ash on his body seemed to taper off at the waist. The man spun and headed back towards my house. I kept looking out, as curious as I was horrified. I thought he was heading for my door, but he made a turn and walked down the side of my house. I dashed over to the next window to see him. He was gone. I was flummoxed. Where the hell did he go? Maybe he fell down? Did he trip over my garden beds? Was I going to find some rummy passed out in my pumpkin patch tomorrow morning? I sat against the wall and debated what to do. Should I go out and confront him? Considering I couldn't even bear to look at doorbell videos, I didn't think that was going to happen. Call the police? Tell them what, some man is hobbling around my house and might be sleeping with my Cinderella pumpkins? Before I could make any decision, I heard something moving along the back of my house. He was at it again. I followed him around the house until he was near my front door. I crouched down and pressed my ear to the door. Maybe he'd mumble something. My phone buzzed. I wasn't surprised, I could hear him moving around out front. But when I opened the screen, I nearly passed out. There was a video from my back door. Had he brought a friend and I was just too stupid or scared to notice? Would they rush me? Could I fight them off? What did they want? Just then, I had a moment of inspiration. Maybe they wanted the necklace? Of course. He'd come back for the necklace. If I gave it back, they'd leave, or so I hoped. Only problem was I had left it the glove box of my car. If I wanted to get it to them, I was going to need to go outside. Motherfucker. I had brought the necklace to a jeweler to see if they could make out what the name was. He said he couldn't, but he knew by the design that it was old. He suggested that I check out who owned my house before me at the local library. I had checked out the necessary files but hadn't had a chance to look at them. And now, because of my stupid cat-like need to be curious, I had to do the craziest thing I've ever considered. I opened the video from the back door and saw another figure, a woman or a man with longer hair. I couldn't tell by the picture. They didn't stay still enough for a great shot. I only saw them in fleeting glances. They were still mulling around the backyard. The man had moved on from my porch and was moving to join his friend. I scuttled over to the front door and gingerly reached up to unlock the door. I grabbed my car keys and hit the unlock button. Through the glass, I could see the headlights flicker and knew the car was open. I took a deep breath, counted to 3 and then swung the door open. The night was cold and it seemed to seep into my bones. I glanced around, looking for anything, before darting out to the car. I was quick but I took a longer route than I normally would. Running from shadow to shadow in hopes of no one seeing me. Right as I got to my car, my goddamn neighbor's motion-activated light came on. I dropped to the ground and stayed as still as I could. I inched my way under my car and looked all around for the figures. I saw my gate, it was closed, and waited for it to swing open. As soon as the bulb shut off, I rolled out from my car and popped open the door. I reached my hand in, damn near ripped the door off the glove box and grabbed the necklace. I shut the door and was about to head back inside the house when I noticed that both figures must have come through the gate when I was grabbing the necklace. I was panicked. I inched back under my car and wished myself as flat as a piece of paper. But they seemed to be walking towards me. Their herky-jerky motions looked haunting in the moonlight. I decided to make an executive decision. I balled my hand around the necklace, readjusted my body under the car and tossed the necklace as far as it would go. It landed about 10 feet away in the grass. The figures didn't seem to notice. I needed them to see the glimmer of the metal in the light, but my neighbor's light wasn't going off, of course. My phone buzzed, a video from my front door. They were getting closer and I was out of ideas. I mumbled a prayer and hurled my phone into the grass. I heard it roll end over end until it skidded to a stop on my neighbor's lawn. The light kicked on. The figure must have noticed the glimmer of the necklace because they headed that way. Suddenly, both of them started making those chittering cicada noises. It became so intense, I thought my ears would explode. I shut my eyes to drown out the sound and then I blacked out. The next thing I remember is someone licking my face. I opened my eyes, expecting to see some deranged psychopath preparing to bite me, but instead found a stray cat licking my nose. The sun was up, it was morning. I rolled out from under my car and stretched. I felt gross. I looked over and saw my neighbor standing there, ready to go to work. He nodded at me. I nodded back. I walked over and retrieved my phone from his lawn. We didn't speak. It was probably for the best. After that, I never had any late-night visitors again. My doorbell videos went back to cats and cars and birds. I was fine with that. I no longer needed the thrill of the unknown. I did have more video from the man, but it was from that night, probably after I had passed out. He and his friend walked past my porch, their movements less jerky than before. More, I don't know, fluid. They seemed to be floating. 10 seconds of them passing and then black. I finally did take a look at the files about my house and I was glad I did. I discovered that, in the 1880s, a woman named Anne Olmeyer had owned the land, not just my house but a few blocks. It was a sprawling farm. She was engaged to be married but died suddenly from a sickness. She was buried on the plot and then it was auctioned off. The man she was engaged to was never mentioned by name. All of this was weird, but what still gives me chills was what happened 6 months later. A friend of mine had lost her battle with cancer and died. After her funeral, I decided to go and find my grandpa and grandma's graves and pay my respects. It had been a while. I must have got turned around, because I could not find where they were. I stopped to pull out my phone and noticed I had a video from my doorbell. I clicked on it. There was nothing there. 10 seconds of nothing until it went to black. Then I heard a cicada. It wasn't on my phone. I looked down and there were 2 sitting on the headstone in front of me. As soon as I looked at them, they took off. That's when my blood ran cold. The headstone I was standing at said Thomas Parson, beloved brother, uncle, and friend. Below that a quote was etched into the limestone, "Can't wait to see you again, Anne." At the base of the headstone, I saw the necklace. Story 5, Behavioral Observations in Nemesidae Giganticus, or Giant Trapdoor Spider. I've always loved spiders. I know most people can't stand them, find them repulsive and horrifying, but I think they're elegant. They have delicate limbs and serve an important purpose in the world around us. Without spiders, we'd be covered up in pest insects. The next time you see one, say thanks for me. I mean, how can you not love the intricate and colorful dance of the peacock spider, Moratus vespertilio, or the long, thin legs of the black widow, Latrodectus mactans? You have to understand how excited I was, then, to discover a whole new species of spider. This fellow is going to rewrite the book on everything we know about arachnids. The square cube law shattered. Of course, a spider is responsible. I've decided to name this new spider Nemesidae giganticus, or, the giant trapdoor spider. This is my record of its behavior. Many people think insects and arachnids are too primitive for complex behaviors, but I challenge you to examine the web of the orb weaver spider if you think that these creatures can't create something on par with the finest works of engineering known to man. The first time I observed Giganticus was in the field behind my apartment. I live in an apartment complex, and there's a field nearby that must be a part of the grounds. There's a lonely street light that flickers from long neglect, and it stands next to, what I guess is sewer or storm access, a manhole set in concrete a few feet above the ground. I'd walked past it many times in the past, visions of Tim Curry's Pennywise chasing me through my imagination. But I never gave it another thought. I've been wrapping up my dissertation, with many late hours of work, writing and rewriting, deleting, and checking my research. It was around 1 a.m., and I was brewing a fresh pot of coffee to help me through the section of my dissertation I was about to finish. My desk overlooks the field behind the apartments. It's the only one that does. I think my apartment was an addition. It's the only one with a window that faces the field, anyway. The street light flickered. It caught my eye, though I normally don't notice it. I looked out. I saw someone walking along the path that cut through the field, connecting the apartments to a nearby gas station. I saw a red glow pulse. Whoever it was smoking. When the walker got under the street light, I saw it was an older man who lived in the apartments. He often walked the complex. I think he's retired. He paused at the manhole and took a seat, puffing on his cigarette, a plastic bag at his side that looked like it had some beer and snacks in it. I was about to get back to work, but a sudden sense of anticipation stopped me. I couldn't take my eyes from the man. I can't describe the feeling, but it was as if I had to look. The man took a final drag on his cigarette, tossed the butt into the grass, and stood up. At that moment the manhole squealed and popped up, and I saw it, the magnificent Giganticus. It had shining black legs, each the size of a 4x4 or a little larger. The flickering light shimmered on the slick carapace, shining and beautiful like lacquered ebony. The thorax of the spider appeared as it moved with deadly grave. The man hadn't even had time to react to the sound of the manhole opening when the spider grabbed him from behind. The man screamed. He made a startled sound, and then a horrific screech as the spider sank chef's knife-sized fangs into his back. The man collapsed under the strength and weight of the strike, and the Giganticus dragged him back into the waiting manhole. His hand dragged against the ground in a futile attempt to stop the predation, but I could tell even in the seconds that this took place that the spider's venom was working. The man's fingers snagged the edge of the open manhole, and the spider grabbed it with a claw and slammed it shut with a final and brutal motion. I saw something tumble to the ground around the manhole. About 8 of them. Short, pale objects. I knew they were the man's fingers. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the manhole, thinking about what I'd seen. Of course, if word got out, that incredible, magnificent creature would be destroyed. I don't know if they'd even bother to try and preserve the body. I had to protect it. That, I knew. But I also knew that it would be found one day. There's no chance that it could exist in a town without being discovered. I resolved, then, that I should study and record its behavior before the inevitable loss of this wonderful animal to the modern world. I started my observation journal. I was too excited to sleep, so I ran to the local Walmart and picked up a digital camera with a good night vision lens and a tripod. I also grabbed a 1 terabyte drive. I had to save every second I caught on video. Back in my room, I set the camera up on the tripod and framed the manhole front and center. Soon, I would know all the comings and goings of Giganticus. My only worry was the fact that the streetlight flickered, but I also knew that spiders often went days, sometimes weeks between meals. Giganticus should lay low for at least a little while, though, I also reasoned, it might eat more often due to its large size. I also took the time to lower my blinds and position them such that, from the outside, I couldn't tell there was a camera pointing out. I didn't need anyone thinking that I was trying to record the children that often played in the field. I could not do my work with the police involved. I waited with impatient fury that time didn't skip forward to morning. As this was a new species, I didn't want to risk going out and discovering that, perhaps, this version ate more than one meal a night. It had to be nocturnal. When the sun came up, I hurried out. Though I wasn't sure if I was making myself a target for the spider, I didn't want someone to find the fingers that were all that remained of the smoking man. I grabbed a Ziploc bag and hurried to the field. I was right. 7 fingers lay on the ground, clipped neatly by the edge of the manhole and the concrete surrounding it. I grabbed these and put them in the Ziploc, and then gathered up the man's beer and pretzels, as it turned out. I looked around, and though there was a little blood where the fingers had been chopped off, I didn't think it would gather much interest. Most people seemed to avoid the manhole sticking out of the ground anyway. No one was around to see me take care of everything. I hurried back to my apartment, where I put the fingers into the garbage disposal in the sink. It took some time, but down they went. The beer I set in the fridge, and the pretzels, the cabinet. If you didn't know what had happened, you would never suspect. Just like a trapdoor spider. If you didn't know it was there, you could stand right next to it and never realize, I thought. I went to sleep. It was Sunday morning. I had a whole day to prepare to observe Giganticus. I slept with a smile on my face, dreaming of conferences and interviews. I woke up in the late afternoon. The sun was setting, and the light in my bedroom was orange, deepening to red as time went on. I got up, took a shower, and made something to eat. I was so excited to begin that night's observations I couldn't even tell you what I ate. Cleaned up, ready to go, and a full pot of coffee in the kitchen, I settled in to begin that night's observation. I didn't expect much. As I said, most spiders go long periods between meals. A thought in the back of my mind kept creeping in, however, Giganticus is no ordinary spider. Be vigilant. I was rewarded for my focus. I knew that trapdoor spiders laid out very special lines of silk that acted as alarms. By placing them radially around the trapdoor, the spider can tell where prey is approaching from. Their feet are incredibly sensitive, able to hear the slightest movement of crickets and beetles. As soon as the sun dipped behind the horizon, but just before the streetlight came on, I saw Giganticus open the lid of the manhole, just a little. A foot sneaked out, and then 3 more. It was on the move. With beautiful grace it slid out of the manhole, making almost no sound whatsoever, and moved about the meadow. I observed its spinnerets laying down lines of silk, repairing listening stations, checking the tension. It hurried back to the manhole and re-entered. The whole process took, at most, 5 minutes, and in the few minutes of dark, the spider remained unobserved, save for one vigilant admirer. I made notes after the spider disappeared, reviewing the footage on my camera and making guesses about size and even weight. I wrote a simple formula based on the square cube law, with some guesses, and figured this magnificent beast weighed in at around 50 or so pounds. A medium-sized dog. Leg span, say, 8 to 10 feet, maybe a little more. I wondered about its venom. Many trapdoor spiders, notably relatives in the infraorder that belong to the funnel web spider, have incredibly toxic venom. At this size, it's possible that the Giganticus could take down a horse or even a larger mammal with a single bite. I wondered how I might get into the burrow and examine the remains of the man the spider took yesterday. I was researching papers on trapdoor spiders when movement on the camera's monitor caught my eye. A large, stray dog, possibly a yellow lab, was trotting through the meadow. I got up and moved closer to the camera. The dog, mouth open, tongue lolling, had no collar. Good, I thought. No one to wonder where Poochie went. The dog stopped to sniff the street light, hiked his leg, and disappeared in a flurry of chitinous legs and the sudden clang of the manhole cover slamming shut. I played that footage back probably 100 times, trying to glean every bit of information I could. The whole attack took less than 3 seconds. The spider rushed out with its 4 legs ready, grabbing the dog with a curling motion, the next 2 legs folding it under, and then a vicious bite. It clutched the dog in the front 4, just off the ground, as the back 4 maneuvered the manhole cover and brought it back under. I noticed this time in the footage the dog spewed foam from the mouth and anus a second after the spider's bite. Its venom was powerful and fast-acting. I imagined that its potency was such that even a drop could kill a strong man, maybe several, in no time. Such a perfect hunter, I thought as I typed up my notes. Tomorrow is a school day. Kids will be coming and going through the field all day, especially teenagers heading out for snacks later in the evening. I wondered if Giganticus would act as many predators do in a situation when confronted with huge amounts of prey. You might call it a feeding frenzy, but there's another type where they just kill everything until the prey stop moving. The first kill panics the rest of the prey animals, and it triggers the hunt-chase-kill instinct over and over. Was Giganticus advanced enough to have such instincts? It was a large, advanced terrestrial hunter. I decided to leave the camera running and try to call it an early night. Tomorrow should be a fascinating observation. Story 6, I woke up freezing. I woke up freezing, physically shaking. I was cold to the point of it being painful, like an itch in the bottom of my feet. I figured it was just because I had slept in shorts, and somehow kicked the blankets off my bed in the night. I just got up and put on a sweater, thinking I would warm up eventually. But this wasn't the friendly kind of cold, the kind that came from forgetting to turn on the heat, no. This was the kind of cold like I'd been snowed into my car on the side of the road, slowly freezing, just waiting for help. Obviously, I didn't get any warmer. This wouldn't be a story if I did, and I spent most of the day trying to get warm. I turned the thermostat up as high as it would go, lit a fire in the fireplace, and layered one item of clothing after another until I was wearing nearly everything I owned. Granted, this wasn't much, but several sweaters, leggings, and pajamas should have solved all my problems. I gulped down cup after cup of tea, and ate nearly 3 cans of soup, to no avail. It's been weeks now. Weeks of shaking cold like I've never felt before. I don't know what to do anymore. Leaving my house isn't helping, so I've just been staying home. At first it was just my feet, but it's nearly to my head now. This creeping, aching cold, filling my chest, and shooting pain through my body. I am now standing in my bathroom, my computer perched on the countertop. I turn on the shower, and stand there, just letting the water wash over me. It soaks through every layer of clothing, until the weight of my wet clothing is too much, and I have to sit in the bathtub. I've pulled my laptop to the edge of the tub now. I don't want to stop writing. I don't think I should. I don't understand what's going on. Every time I look up, the handle is set farther to the cold side than I had put it. I keep turning it as far over to the hot side as it can go, and it keeps getting hotter and hotter, hotter than it should be able to. But it still hasn't been enough to stop the icy numbness from spreading through my body. It's like a sharp pain spreading through the branches of my nervous system, before fading into nothing. I can't feel the keys underneath my fingertips anymore, and I have to look at the keyboard just to type. I've been here for hours now, the cold spreading still. I feel it in my eyes now. The water must be well past boiling, but I've never once stopped turning up the heat, even when my flesh started to melt off, sloughing off in blistered, bloody layers into the tub. All I can hear anymore is the running water, and the bones of my fingers scraping against the keyboard. I have to stop writing now. I can barely see anymore. Story 7, My Sister's Lover. So, some backstory. My 22-year-old sister lives with me and my fiancé. She recently quit her job, she got it back a few days ago, but that's really irrelevant to this story. She had been on these dating apps for a while, but things didn't really get freaky until she quit. I tried to give her privacy and freedom, but she was leaving apps and messages up everywhere. My computer, for one, and my fiancé's gaming computer for another. We didn't want to invade her privacy, but when you get on your own computer and the messages are in your face, sometimes you can't help but see something. For instance, she left a site up on my computer where she had sent nudes and sexts to some random people. One message said, "No, I can't see you. My sister lives with me and is a super bitch." Now, why did this bother me? She had lived with us, rent-free, for almost a year. She didn't help with the cleaning or cooking or any of the other chores, and her room should be condemned. There is a piece of fish in the floor that has been there for 3 months. I had taken her in, fed and clothed her, and practically waited on her hand and foot. I woke her up for her shifts, cooked her food, and made sure she was generally healthy. So, to top all of this shit off, she was calling me names and talking about me behind my back. Hell, she even beat the shit out of me and I did nothing. She has kicked me in the face several times. When I thought I was pregnant, she kicked me in the stomach before slamming a door across my midsection, and she broke one of my knuckles. Why do I deal with it? She's family. Even more icing on this shit cake, once she quit her job, she started inviting random guys over to the house. She would let them in while I was sleeping without my knowledge. One of these guys that she invited over was engaged. My best friend and I looked him up and found out he had 2 kids with this girl. When we told Patty, she was nonchalant about it. She had known. This bothers me, but what bothers me more is that this guy, call him Jared, knew where I lived. Patty, my sister, a pseudonym, blocked him on the sites. The guy showed up to see why she hadn't been answering him. He pounded on the door and demanded to be let in. He came around to the windows and stared through them, making death threats. I am ornery, though, so every door and window was already locked. He couldn't get in. Standing on the other side of the door, I waited with a hammer, claw side out, in my hand. I waited for him to get inside. I could have called the cops. I should have, but the thought hadn't crossed my mind. What I did think about was this guy getting inside and hurting one of us. Suddenly, the banging stopped. I stood silently and waited. A key clicked in the lock as a bead of sweat dripped down my face. Stepping away from the door, I tightened my grip on the hammer and drew it back, ready to swing. The door banged open from the force. I swung before I could think about it. I blinked and my fiancé's face came into focus. "Damn, baby, are you trying to kill someone?" he clicked, nervously. I nodded my head and told him what I had seen, honey. He stayed very calm as he spoke, pulling the hammer out of my hand. "Are you sure?" Tears streamed down my face as I collapsed. I hit the ground and said Jared in my living room. Screaming, I pointed at him. Gerald, my fiancé, once again, not a real name, turned to where I pointed. He shook his head and dropped the hammer. Stooping down, he cupped my face in his hands. "There is nothing there." I whimpered as he held me. The hallucinations are getting worse. Story 8. I live in Kazakhstan, and a couple of weeks ago something weird happened. I don't really know how to start this. I'd heard about this place before, and occasionally browsed it back in the day. Of course, I never thought I'd have to be one of the people writing. Still, I find myself in that precarious situation of having too little evidence or conviction to visit the police, but enough paranoia to at least see if maybe someone out there will give me the help, or directions, I so desperately need. I'm writing this some weeks after the event itself, if you could even call it that, and so naturally I thought that having to sit down and actually remember what happened would be difficult. However, I find no such impediment now, and the events of that day come back to me as easily as if I was recounting them as they happen. I live in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia. I don't want to go any more into it than that, but the country is necessary just to give you some context. The Kazakh people are very similar to Russians in their reclusiveness. They don't like to interfere in others' business if it doesn't affect them. That can be both a weakness and a strength. I'm a native Russian, so from a certain perspective I can understand. But nevertheless, I've always been a more active sort of person, despite my initial introversion in my early teens, and so consider this inaction to be the reason why our country is still not free, and very much authoritarian. I'd lost a lot of weight in the past 2 years. Dieting, exercise, the works. I'd gone from obese at 15 to normal weight. Part of this cycle of rehabilitation was a weekly massage. That week, I'd went to my first session in months. We'd been away on holidays, and several circumstances after that made it so that I hadn't been there in a very long time. Mind you, this massage place isn't exactly high class. It's just an apartment that's been refurbished with smooth lighting, Eastern-looking decor, and a table on which to lie down. Still, I had somewhat started to look forward to it. I hold the firm belief that the only reason people go to massages is to get to relax for an hour with an excuse ready. I had nothing better to do, but at least the table was comfortable. The reason there's so much preamble here is because I want you to understand the sort of environment I'm talking about, because it's only in this sort of environment that something like this, I think, can happen. People don't talk to each other here. Everyone has their own problems, and so no one bothers anyone. Everyone has their little circles of friends, or their groups of neighbors, and outside of that there's really no one they feel like talking to. Kazakhstan's architecture is perfect for it, too, because we have closed in groups of apartment complexes, built to be identical, all occupying as little space as possible. The illusion of closeness that hides ignorance. Our city is situated to the north of a mountain range, and so while the majority of it is on relatively low ground, smaller and smaller houses, as well as tons of apartment complexes go up a way higher than that. In fact, from some of these places you can see the entirety of the city, smog and all, while still technically being inside it. Walking uphill was never as difficult for me as back down, but I'd still started early and so, arrived earlier. The apartment building where I was headed was part of a sort of complex of apartment buildings set together in a square, with the entrances looking inside. There were 5 of these squares, identical to each other, Soviet architecture, arranged in a line, stood at a winding road leading up into the mountains. The apartment I was going to was in the middle square. Each of these groupings of apartments had their own communities, as Kazakhs tend to be nice to their neighbors, to the point of intrusiveness. Each community has their own way of doing things, and it so happened that the one that the massage place was part of happened to be equipped with a proper guard booth and road gate. I have no idea whether or not that's an actual term for a. It's the closest thing I could find with Google Translator. The guard at the entrance was old, but the sort of nice-old type of man that seemed like he always had a half-smile on his face and not a worry in the world. The place struck me as simultaneously very oppressive, but also very nice. It's difficult to describe without an intimate knowledge of the architecture of post-USSR countries, but to put it simply, while the plain grey walls were very polished, and the paint on the driveway and the small playground looked fresh and sparkling, it was still grey walls, tall and monotonous apartment buildings, and fenced-off entrances. The skies were relatively clear, but dusk was rapidly approaching, and the whole vibe of the place seemed to be somehow very unnerving to me, despite nothing of the sort happening any other time I'd gone. I was let through no problem, having an appointment with the massage place booked, and made my way over to the porch where it was. Once again, some of the meaning of the word might be lost in translation. I should mention that I usually wear headphones when walking anywhere. I have a huge selection of music, with my taste varying greatly on my mood, but the important thing was that I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings as I made my way up to the intercom, rang it, and went through. My massage went well, and I slept through nearly half. The entire time something kept nagging me, at the back of my head, though. I couldn't quite place what it was, and thought that it might be something I'd forgotten. I checked my purse, found my money there, and decided it was nothing. Then, as I left and went back outside, I suddenly realized exactly what it was. As I'd arrived, I'd noticed the playground and small basketball court set up in the center of the square of empty land which, for a lot of these sorts of groupings of apartments usually wasn't tended to at all, and occasionally had the odd metal bar or worn-down swing set. Here everything looked squeaky clean, which was what drew my eyes to it initially. Back when I'd been here last time it was still okay looking, but that day everything seemed to gleam. As I looked, I saw a couple of kids playing in the playground, and some older boys in the basketball field. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but as I found out now, my eyes had noticed what my brain had not. None of them moved. I continued walking as I realized this, and now actively watched each child for signs of movement. There was a pair of girls on the swings looking at each other, wearing similar dresses. There was a boy at the bottom of the slide, sitting and holding his knee. On the football field, several guys about my age were stood in different, active-looking positions. One was holding a ball, preparing to shoot it. Another one was trying to intercept it. As I continued to watch and walk, they still didn't move. Now, I'm not the type to go into something I don't know, usually. But something overcame me then. Maybe it was the basic drive of curiosity. Maybe something else. I felt my arms taking out my headphones from my ears, and my legs moving towards the playground. I approached gingerly, waiting for one of them to jump suddenly and for all of them to laugh and say it was some sort of joke. It would be unusual, but at least feasible. All I felt now was that this was somehow unreal. I felt like this should be a dream, but also knew that the only thing that would get me out of it would be getting scared enough to wake up. If that makes sense. I even reached out my finger to touch one of the girls on the shoulder. Did I want to ask something? Was that it? My thought process was muddled. All I knew was what was right now, and not what had been or what would be. Hello? I said, my voice unnaturally quiet. Both because of the dead silence, and my sudden flood of fright. I had touched the girl's shoulder. It was soft, like she was stuffed. I felt suddenly like there were people watching me. I looked around behind me and my eyes turned upwards to the floor on which I'd just had my massage. There, to my horror, I saw an open window, and a face looking out at me. This was the jump I was waiting for. But I didn't wake up. It was my masseur. She was looking directly at me, her eyes wide, shaking her head. I tried to make my most questioning expression, but she just ignored it. With a frantic gesture, she pointed out to the guard booth. I looked over. There was no one there. Not wanting to look back, I started to move, much quicker now, out onto the street. As I said, it's been about 2 weeks since then. I've made several excuses, each more extreme than the last, to not go back again. My mum is angry at me, but I don't care. I don't really know where to go from here. I have no inclination to go to the police about this, but neither does that mean I can come to terms with this and forget about it. Instead of a conclusion, I'll just write out some more fact about the whole ordeal. For one, there are other weird things that happened on that day. I've always believed in the power of coincidence more than anything else, and so at first, I was skeptical that this had anything to do with it, but later in the evening I heard several helicopters flying over the city. To point out, here this is very rare, like, taking pictures of the helicopters as they fly by sort of rare. Secondly, the first conclusion that came to my head probably came to yours. Maybe it's for some sort of movie? It's likely, of course. But the masseur's face. I dunno, once again, I don't believe too much in intuition and being able to say what a person is feeling at a glance, especially when it was from so far away, but for this occasion I felt like it was obvious that she was terrified. Last of all, in terms of contacting the masseur herself, I haven't mustered up the courage to do it yet. I've asked my mum several times if she's called, but as you can imagine it's a bit of a sore subject with her, so I can only work with so much here. So, what should I do? Is there something to be worried about here, or am I being paranoid? Story 9, They were inside. Hey! Wake up, hey wake up! My cousin shouted in a hushed tone while jerking my arm. Dude. It's 3 a.m. in the morning, what do you want? I was obviously annoyed and wanted to go back into the warmth of my blanket, but my cousin, accompanied by 3 others, was persistent enough to force me out of bed. Today's the night of Amavasya, new moon night, yeah, so what? I asked in a clearly frustrated tone. Interested in a test of courage? I should have said no. It was a few days after Durga Puja, a Hindu festival, had ended. All my relatives had come to the village to celebrate and were planning on leaving soon enough. But my cousins had other plans before leaving. They had always been a fun-loving bunch, so the test of courage was not really much of a surprise. Come on man, don't be a chicken. Fine, I acquiesced. My false sense of pride forced me to agree to the challenge. That's our brave little man. My elder cousin said, elated while patting me on the head. What do I need to do? I shouldn't have asked. You know the temple of goddess Kali below the huge banyan tree? Go there, pray to the goddess statue and come back. He made it sound as if praying to her was like performing a satanic ritual. She was nothing of that sort. She was a revered goddess of strength, although with a subjectively terrifying visage, blood-red tongue sticking out, eyes peeled wide open, weapons of war clenched in all 4 of her hands and a necklace of severed heads draped over her steadfast neck. Okay, I said, my false sense of pride kicking in again. As soon as I stepped outside, the cold autumn breeze hit me. I wrapped my shawl around me tighter, using one hand to hold the flashlight while the other cowered under the shawl. Each took turns holding the flashlight. It was pitch black outside, the fog made things worse. The flashlight could not rip through the curtains of darkness far enough. The only visible things were the earthen path below my feet, silhouettes of trees and huts, and the sea of darkness that lay around me. I kept walking, shivering partly due to the cold and partly due to genuine fear. Fear of what exactly? Don't know. Maybe fear of the unknown, maybe fear that someone or something had its eyes riveted on me. Perks of watching too many horror movies. I tried to convince myself that my imaginations were running wild. I should have turned back. It was a fairly straightforward path. After a while of walking on the roads flanked by trees, I arrived at a crossroad. Path straight led to the temple, path left led to a part of the village I had not explored yet. Went straight, needless to say, and soon arrived at my destination. From a distance I pointed my flashlight at the humble temple. I was taken aback. There it was, the statue, in all its terrifying glory. It was as if her eyes pierced through mine, it was as if her eyes were trailing each movement of mine, it was as if she was holding her breath in, ready to pounce. I couldn't go closer. I was paralyzed with fear, fear from a goddess we worship. I couldn't touch the temple to pray and turned back. I'll just tell my cousins that I prayed. I'm sure they won't figure it out. I should have prayed. I soon arrived at the crossroads once again. My feet moved faster with each step. I was sure someone or rather something was following me. The sound of thudding footsteps did not sync with my running. My body acted on its own and with a jerk my flashlight pointed backwards. There was nothing. My fear did not decrease one bit. I turned back on my way. There it was. A silhouette of a lanky man standing right in front of me. Before I could even point my flashlight, the shadow leapt onto me, arms spread. My heart jumped to my mouth, as if bottlenecking my ability to scream completely, mere seconds away from fainting. Oh my God, you should have seen the look on your face. My 4 cousins started laughing. I wanted to punch them. Older or younger, men or women, I wanted to drive my fist through their faces. My shivering this time was out of pure unbridled rage. Come on, no need to be so uptight. It was just a prank. You passed, now let's go home. The quick transition between chill out and let's go home felt odd. What seemed more odd was the fact that a group of social media obsessed people did not record a prank that elaborate. Something was off. Wait, why are we going this way? I asked. It's a shortcut. Something was extremely off. Where are your flashlights? Their robotic, synchronized laughing turned into a blank, expressionless stare. All eyes on me. You have yours, don't you? One of them asked in a deep, nonchalant voice. Yeah, but why did you guys come out this late without a single flashlight? Their eyes kept widening till they formed circles, their lips formed a straight line. This time I clearly understood what I feared. I ran. I peeked backwards, all while running at an unprecedented speed. They were simply standing there motionless. Not a shout to call me back, no running after me, just stood there with their eyes fixated on me. Then they started walking. They walked idly to that same unknown road and melted into the darkness. I reached my grandparents' hut with ragged gasps. Bolting up the cemented stairs, I started banging on the wooden door. It was more of an attempt to break in rather than to wake everyone up. Either way, the whole village was awake soon enough. The elders, the curious, everyone came running. Among the crowd were the 4 I had outrun a few seconds ago. Where were you at this time of the night? One of my cousins asked impatiently. It was no longer dark. The lanterns had lit up the night. I was no longer alone, everyone surrounded me. I could speak once again. What do you mean? You guys sent me out on the first place. What? That goddamn test of courage. What test of courage? Don't be ridiculous. Why would we do that? Good question. Why would they do that? Why did I agree to this challenge in the first place? Was I sleepy? The more I questioned myself, the more ridiculous the notion of this challenge seemed. I did see you get out of the hut on your own, but I thought you were going to the latrine outside. My mother added to our heated conversation. My fear started creeping in again. I shared my story with everyone. Most believed my story, which only added to my fear. Of course they believed me. Why would I go roaming around at 3 a.m. without a definite purpose? We all went back to our huts with a volition to sleep. But my eyes refused to shut and I awaited dawn impatiently. I looked at the bed next to mine where my elder cousin was sleeping. His eyes were closed tight. A U-shaped smile calmly stretched from ear to ear. They were inside. Story 10, please help me find this video of Jack Hanna. Every time there's an Ask Reddit post about trying to find obscure media, I give this a shot but so far have had no luck. I'm turning to you, r/nosleep, since I think the subject matter is appropriate. I'm looking for an infomercial featuring famed zoologist Jack Hanna that my friend and I saw back in the early 2000s. When I was a kid, my friend and I would frequently have sleepovers at my place. During the day, we'd run around like maniacs outside, playing basketball and trying to make miracle baseball catches in a game we'd call Top 10, as in Sports Center Top 10 Plays. Then when night fell we would come back inside and watch ungodly amounts of television. My house had a pretty nice finished basement featuring a reasonably sized TV with cable access. We'd make our sleepover nest in front of the warming glow and watch the same episode of Sports Center over and over again, with some Family Guy in between. Eventually, when we grew bored of that, sometime around 1 a.m., we would engage in what I guess you could call a boob hunt. This wasn't pre-internet necessarily, but close enough that the most exhilarating thing imaginable for stupid preteen boys was heavily pixelated Girls Gone Wild commercials. Some channel higher up in the cable offerings would inevitably have the same Girls Gone Wild infomercial we'd seen dozens of times, but we'd watch it again, looking for any lapses in the generously applied pixelation. Puberty is a nightmare. One night during this dumb ritual, my friend and I presumably couldn't find any good almost smut, so instead we settled on what appeared to be an infomercial or paid programming featuring zoologist Jack Hanna. I'm not sure what level of fame Jack Hanna has. He's apparently popped up on some national late-night talk shows through the years as the guy who introduces the hosts and guests to adorable, and sometimes dangerous animals. I was only aware of him because he was the director of a local zoo by me. He was kind of the public-facing image of the zoo and would appear at events or in the odd commercial. My friend and I were happy to see him because if we couldn't watch Girls Gone Wild, at least we'd see some cool animals. The infomercial started out normally enough. It was like a brief biography of the man with Hannah, himself, occasionally talking to the camera or doing voiceover discussing how much he loved animals. We'd see Jack at the local zoo, shaking hands with patrons or brief clips of interviews he'd done throughout the years. At one point in the infomercial, Jack was conducting a sort of show in the penguin enclosure at the zoo to an excited audience of sunburnt Midwesterners. The penguins didn't do any tricks obviously, but Jack was standing in the enclosure, modeled to look like the icy tundra of Antarctica, and reciting off penguin facts to the enraptured audience. At least that's how I remember it. It's been a long time. Following Jack's penguin talk, I fully expected the show to move on to the next clip of him interacting with animals. Instead it cut right to Jack in the backseat of a car with a little kennel next to him. At this point it seemed to be Jack Hanna, a single cameraman, and whatever was in the kennel next to him. Jack was speaking to the cameraman but not in a way matching his public persona. He seemed tired. It was clear that this was after hours and Jack was on his way home, or at least was done for the day. I remember the car stopping and Jack stepping out holding that kennel. The camera followed him as he exited and it turns out they were heading into the lobby of a hotel. Jack, holding a suitcase and a kennel, checked in at the front desk and the show cut again to him in his hotel room. It was a normal, nondescript hotel room like that of an entry-level Hilton or whatever. Again, it seemed to be only Jack, the camera person, and his bags inside. "It's been a day," Jack said to the camera, offering up a weak smile. He walked into the bathroom of the room and turned on the faucet in the tub. He sat there on the edge, still wearing his tan safari uniform that all zookeepers wear. Periodically he would dip his hand into the water, apparently testing the temperature. When it was to his liking, he got up, disappeared from view, and then shortly returned with the little kennel he had brought. He opened it up, set it on the ground, and after a few moments 2 little black and white penguins waddled out. Penguins in a hotel room. The novelty of this was amazing. My friend and I exchanged glances and maybe even shared a "what the fuck" or two. Penguins in a hotel room was undoubtedly better than Girls Gone Wild retreads. "These little guys are my friends," Jack said, glancing back to the camera and offering an even bigger, yet still weirdly bittersweet smile. He really did seem tired or sad or something. Perhaps it was just the echoing effect of the hotel bathroom. No one sounds particularly excited or energized in a hotel room. The little penguins waddled around in concentric circles in the area immediately outside their kennel. They didn't seem to know what to make of the strange environment. Jack kind of looked at them admiring for a bit and then picked the first one up gently and slowly lowered him into the tub. He did the same for the second penguin. The water wasn't enough to submerge them and they certainly couldn't swim, but the penguins seemed pretty stoked to get into the water. Then wordlessly, Jack began to undress. He took off his tan safari jacket, khaki shorts, and socks. My friend and I watched, astonished as to what we were seeing. Wasn't this a show? Jack was just doing a show about penguins earlier. Now we're watching an adult man, a famous adult man undress. Jack took off his underwear and immediately the area around his waist became pixelated. Before I could even process what was happening, Jack gingerly stepped into the tub and lowered himself in, leaving plenty of room at the other end for the splashing penguins. He let out a satisfied as his body entered the warm water. I started laughing. I didn't know what else to do. This was undoubtedly the strangest thing I had seen to this point in my life yet or since. I looked over at my friend, expecting him to join in on the laughter, but he was watching the TV, rapt, and barely registered my presence. I turned my attention back to the TV and continued to watch. Jack had a fun time splashing at his penguin friends for a bit, and all the time the cameraman stood by the tub and silently captured it all. Jack began to laugh as he splashed and tickled the little birds. His laughter grew and grew until his features seemed to freeze for a moment. He brought his hands to his face and began to cry. At first it was a whimper, still with the traces of laughter around the edges. Then before long the poor man was expelling deep, heaving sobs. This happened for what seemed to be eternity, my friend and I watching. Jack continued to cry as his cameraman finally spoke up. "What's wrong, Jack?" the man behind the camera asked in a deep, yet empathetic voice. Jack was crying so hard he couldn't respond for a bit, and when he finally did, it was a quiet voice, barely picked up by the microphone. "You know," he squeaked. You know. "Yeah, Jack, I know," the camera guy said. Jack pulled his hands from his face, his eyes were red and his cheek lined with tears. He looked back to the cameraman and he was smiling his bittersweet little smile again. "I just miss it," Jack said. Then nodded. "Yeah, I miss it." "What do you miss about it, Jack?" the man asked. Jack looked at the penguins, smiling through his tears at them as though he were a proud parent. He didn't look back to the camera as he spoke and instead kept his eyes trained on the birds. "The swimming, mostly," he said. Then Jack gave a great sigh and slowly stood up from his spot in the tub, the pixelation following his naked waist again. He slowly stepped out of the tub and walked towards the camera, stopping just short of the cameraman. He looked deep into the lens as though he was seeing past the camera, and the man holding it and peering directly into my basement. "Get to the C if you can. Get to the S," he said, but couldn't finish his thought because the infomercial cut back to Jack Hanna at the zoo, talking about snow leopards. After a few more minutes of this, the program ended with a brief, expected wrap-up monologue from Jack. As a ShamWow commercial started, I looked to my friend to talk about what we just witnessed. Tears were streaming down his face. "I'm going to sleep," he said. "So, has anyone seen this Jack Hanna video online anywhere? I know what I saw and I know it exists. I want to ask my old friend about it, but his family moved out of town shortly after this and I've not seen or heard of him since." Story 11, By the Cracking of My Heart. I buried my dreams in a hidden graveyard. Shattered hopes and bloody broken promises. I sat beneath skeletal boughs who dance in slivers of silver moonlight, whispering the forlorn hymns of haunted woods. They lulled me into a cathartic numb. I dreamt of darkness then. Tilda. My very first memory is of my mother. Her scarred arms embracing me in a final moment of fierce love. I can't remember her face anymore. Just how deep the crimson was that pulled around us. How the air boiled and the skies seethed as ash blotted out the sun. Dark shadows dancing through the grey haze that spanned the horizon. I love you, Aislinn. You are my everything. My dream. I remember how her delicate fingers chased away my tears, leaving trails of blood in their wake. Dad plucked me from her cooling corpse and whisked me away. I was a child born in the midst of a war, never to know the delights of peace. I never learned to ride a bike. There was never cold popsicles to leave sticky fingers and stained lips. I learned of death and how to summon it with a steel blade or shiny bullets. I always thought my dad was the greatest man to ever live. We were always on the move, one step ahead of the war. Hiding in the shadows, preparing the way. My father was a treasure hunter, a tomb raider, a thief. The most precious thing he ever stole was time. My time. He taught me to hunt the things that go bump in the night, those that wrought chaos in the day, and those that dealt mayhem in the dusk. Some we ended their gruesome reign, some we offered asylum. When I could hold my own he often left me alone, always promising to return. He would be gone for days or weeks, sometimes months at a time. He always found his way back to me. On the day of my 16th birthday he returned from a particularly long absence. I found it, Ace, he grinned as he tousled my hair. I batted at his hand and buried my face in his hard chest. I had missed him and had much to tell him of my adventures. Dad put his hands on my shoulders and pushed me back. He looked so haggard and tired. Are you okay, Daddy? Ace, his voice was warm, emotions crumbling his cool exterior. You are the only thing that could ever break me. I cannot lose you. He pulled an ancient book from his rucksack. Opening it, he tore out a page yellowed with age and laid it on the ground between us. I watched curiously as he sat hunched over his work, pouring strange tinctures and whispering stranger words, his voice both raspy and deep. He paused and peered up at me, wiping the sweltering heat from his brow. I don't want you in this life anymore, you deserve so much more. He tugged a prismatic chunk of fabric from his back pocket, pulling on the tattered edge and removed a single ruby thread. Dad reached for my hand and began to wrap it around my wrist. The delicate string glittered in the sun, shimmering an oil spill of colors as in hung from his fingers. It shifted and danced at his touch, one loop for a past I cannot give you back. He wrapped it a second time, one for the present, of which I will never forgive myself for. He wrapped it a third, one for your future, which is long and bright, and, clearing his feelings from his throat, tears wetting his lashes, he stared up at me, and absent of me. What? I yanked my hand back expecting the thread to fall, instead it wove together of its own accord. I stared in horror as my dad stood and flipped open his lighter. I found it, I found a way to go back, Ace. I have to save her. He smiled sadly as tears ran down his face. Radio, his voice boomed and he flicked the striker. The small flame that leapt to life seemed to fall in slow motion as it plummeted to the parchment and lit my world ablaze. The air screamed and the world trembled as impossible living words bloomed from the smoldering pile that once was a simple page in a book. I'll always find you, Aislinn, you're my ace. Never forget that. His body twisted and began to unravel. Peel after peel of bloody flesh tore from his body and danced with the swirling words. The air wailed and reached a pitch so excruciating I thought my eardrums would surely burst along with my heart as my dad, my best friend, came undone and became no more. Dad. No. I screamed and screamed as I fell to my knees. I dug into the earth where he had stood, my nails clawing at the embers and the hard dirt beneath until they bled. Clutching the ash and earth to my chest, I cried until I could cry no more. Tilda. I would like to say that I healed. That I grew up to be a magnificent woman worthy to be that man's daughter. That I lived a good life, happy in my own way. But that would be a fairy tale, and this is a nightmare. I don't know why I wasn't enough. Why, as his daughter, I couldn't keep him here. I loved him more than anything, I thought he felt the same. I missed him terribly, and he missed so much. My world stopped the day he left me there, broken and sobbing in the middle of a dirt crossroad. Literally. I don't know what magic he did, I don't know why he cursed me so. I haven't aged a day. I traveled the world until it gave a great sigh and ended. I found myself in a small strange copse of trees. Who might you be? A strange being made of stars, queried Ace. I spat my name out before I could question my surroundings. And what is your wish? My wish? Yes. A thing that you desire above all else. I know what a wish is. I may have come off rather surly as he knit his brows together and smirked at me. Spit it out, forbidden one. What do you desire? I want my dad. The words tumbled from my mouth. The old wound in my heart burned and threatened to crack open anew. The creature's eyes narrowed and he was upon me, sharp fingers made of shadows digging in my arms as he gripped me tight while he breathed deeply into my neck. His stare made me dizzy. Is that all? Yes, my trembling voice betrayed my fear of him. His cold breath tickled my nose as he leered down at me. "As you wish," he whispered before licking my face from my chin to my hairline. I found myself in a world untouched by the ravages of the war. I could feel my dad, he was here, somewhere. So I searched. He had always found me, it was time to return the favor. I traveled this world and learned its secrets. I found traces of Dad here and there but never so much as caught a glimpse of him. I was giddy at the thought of seeing his familiar smile light his eyes when they would one day find my own. One day they did. It was not the moment I had imagined. While he did smile at me, it was the kind one affords a confused stranger. He knew me not. It was like having the world knocked out from under you. Air left my lungs like a kick in the chest and my heart stuttered in pain. I doubled over gasping, as he winked at me and walked away. I lost him in the crowd at a museum that day. It was worse than watching his body torn to pieces before me. I had nothing in this piece of shit world, so I did what I do best, hunt and pillage. I recently came upon a strange myth of a weapon with the power to destroy any foe. It's hidden deep within layers of lore and surrounded by a forest of lies. The forest isn't so bad. It's dark and the trees seem to move when you aren't looking at them. I'd like to say I'm not thoroughly lost, but that'd be a lie. I can't trust the trail I'm on, hell I don't even know what direction I'm going as the compass just spins, but I've got nowhere else to be and more time than I can imagine. I'd walked probably a day, or maybe a week, when I finally came upon a break in the trees. Sunlight glimmered and shone off the surface of a perfectly smooth lake hidden in the uncanny woods. One would expect a stagnant smell to come from such a still body of water, but not even duckweed wanted to grow here. I peered down at the black glass surface and examined myself. My eyes were cold and hard, belying the youthfulness of my face. I wondered if I looked like her, my mother. The one so precious to him that he forgot me. My eyes were replicas of my father's. For one faint second I saw him there, smiling up at me from the depths of the water. I leaned down, longing to touch my dad. My image mirrored my movements and pulled me from my reverie. It smiled up at me though I felt no pull at the downturned corners of my lips. This must be the lie of the forest. I leaned farther to break the facade of happiness my reflection wore. It opened my mouth and from the horrific gaping maw a hand shot up and pulled me in and under. Down, down, down it pulled me. The sheer pressure squeezing my last breath from my lungs in a massive gurgling scream. Hands tore at me, pulling my hair and scratching my face. It was darker than night and colder than Medusa's stare. My chest burned, longing for a gasp of air. I choked, feeling the icy waters fill my mouth and trickle into my dying soul. I curled into a ball, willing myself to live. I wanted to live. I needed to find my dad again. I couldn't die here, not without telling him one last time that I loved him. No matter what. My wrist burned white hot, and I lashed out, kicking and clawing at the hands that dragged me to my death. One last burst of adrenaline. I flailed in the thick waters, swatting at nothing. I kicked my feet out, intending on trying to swim to the surface and instead found the bottom of the lake. With the greatest push I could muster with my waning strength, I shoved off the bottom and stood up. What the ever-loving frick kind of bullshit was that? I stood in water up to my armpits, but I was no longer in the lake. I sucked in great gulps of air and staggered out of the shallow water. Soft golden light flickered somewhere deep within the cave I found myself in. I choked and sputtered on the water that my body projectile vomited from my stomach and lungs while I shivered uncontrollably. "Oh?" A childlike voice echoed from the dark. "Hello?" It giggled. Nothing is more terrifying than the voice of a child in a place children should not be. Especially in the dark. I pressed my back against the cave wall and squinted through my soaked hair. Edging closer to the source of the light, the small voice called out indiscernible words. I peeked around centuries-old stalagmites and found an unbelievable sight. Piles of golden treasures filled the cavern surrounding a pit of fire in the middle. It called to me and my fingers twitched to touch the shiny wealth. My close encounter with death forgotten, I stepped into the massive room. The flames of the pit flickered and swayed, my shadow danced along the walls of rock seeming to reach for the glittering gypsum ceiling above. Hello. The impish disembodied voice called out. Salam? Namaste? Merhaba? Aveti? The small voice rose higher and higher with each greeting. Show yourself, I demanded, though my voice was hoarse and my throat cracked at the effort, causing me to erupt in a coughing fit as more lake water rasped my lungs. Oh. I'm terribly sorry. How very rude of me. The fire burst, sending embers floating into the air. It swayed and grew as a small flame pulled itself from the pit and stood up. It placed fingers of fire on its little hips and raised a tiny sunburst face to me, smiling brightly while its blazing hair whipped about. It bowed. Welcome to the Cave of Wonders. May I have your name? The way it asked didn't set right with me. You may not. Though you may call me Ace. Clever, clever. It squealed. Clever, clever, clever girl. Names have power. Never give them away. It reached its little hand out in greeting and I backed away from it. Oh. Yes. You'd melt, wouldn't you? It giggled and spun in circles, dousing its own flame. As the smoke surrounding it settled, a small form began to take shape. No larger than a doll, with cracked skin the color of dust and long wild raven hair, it stood with its back to me. Where'd you go? It scratched its head, sending embers sparking out. I cleared my throat. Oh. Silly, silly me. It whirled around in a cloud of ash. Its face was smooth and neither male nor female. Hot coals sat in place of its eyes and its wicked smile was filled with too many sharp quartz teeth. And you are? I asked. Oh, I am fire, I am smoke, I am the eternal flame, I am life, and I am death, but you may call me. It tapped a molten gold finger to its pointed chin, Ember. Yes, yes, I much like that. It squealed and clapped, giggling its own name to itself. Ember, Ember, Ember. With each word the quartz teeth sparked against each other. It giggled and coughed a billow of black smoke. Clasping its hands behind its back, Ember rocked forwards onto its toes. Tell me, human, Ace. Yes, Ace, tell me to what I owe the pleasure? And how did you get past the swallows? Swallows? Yes. How'd you do it? I didn't see any birds. The thought stopped me. How hadn't I noticed? There hadn't been a single animal in the forest of lies. Birds? What do birds have to do with anything? You asked how I got past the swallows. This little creature was starting to get on my nerves. No, 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 no. The swallows. In the lake. Why didn't they swallow you? Oh, I rubbed my wrist tenderly, it still ached. My finger caressed the red thread. Ember's eyes grew wide and it wrung its hands and tiptoed closer. Where did you get that? I must have it. Give it to me. No. I turned my body protectively. It's from my dad. You can't have it. I'll trade you for it. It gestured to the mounds of treasure piled high behind it. No. Then why are you here? It stomped its foot and the fire in the pit jumped and swelled before calming. I heard of a weapon that can defeat any foe. I came to get it. Oh my, oh my. Yes, yes. I know what you speak of. It's here. You can have it, if I can have that pretty. It grinned up at me, grasping the hem of my wet shirt. It sizzled and steamed and began to burn. It's just string. Oh? But is it? It's such a pretty thread. It smiled so wide I thought its nasty little mouth might rip. There seemed to be more spiky quartz teeth than before. A snake-like tongue slapped out and licked at its lips, which cracked, revealing smoldering fire beneath. Show me the weapon first. It eyed me thoughtfully for a minute before stomping back to the pit and reaching deep into the glowing mass. From the flames Ember pulled a small dagger. That's it? I very much doubted a dagger the size of a letter opener would defeat all my foes. Ember glowered at me, the cracks in its lips spreading up its face, shattering its wicked innocence. Of course it is, it growled. It takes its shape from whatever foe you face. Its eyes opened wide, the red coals rocking in the sockets. He leered at me. But like with all magics there is a cost. It calls to the strong and monstrous. You will have a weapon, and the foes to test its strength. Do we have a trade? There was no way I could trade the only non-essential gift my dad had ever given me, to this little squirt. But if that weapon could really defeat any foe, can it really defeat any foe? Any indeed. Even curses? Nothing will stand in your way. I considered my options. I could give it my bracelet or what? I had nothing else to offer Ember. I looked at the piles of jewels and gold and wondered at what treasures lay buried beneath the mounds. There was nothing in this world I could offer Ember that would come close to the collection it already had. It wanted my bracelet. I looked at the thread, it still glimmered and shimmered, seemingly alive. I studied the blistered skin beneath. What had happened in the water? Was this more than it seemed? I don't believe you, Ember. I don't think that's the weapon. Ah, it stomped and jumped up and down. Its grey skin molting off, exposing chunks of seared and rotted flesh. It is. It is. Prove it, I dared the little beast. Ember turned and gnashed its teeth at me, hackles rising. It rumbled, and just how do you suppose I do that? Kill a swallow. Tricky, tricky ace. I cannot enter the lake, surely you must know this. You're after all my treasure, aren't you, little thief? Ember grew and blazed as it shouted. Its back touched the gypsum ceiling far above, forcing Ember to its knees. The charcoal skin stretching and ripping open. Blackened ribs longer than myself poked out of its molten core. Golden treasures began to melt where it slammed its fist in anger. Shall I just take the pretty? Shall I pick it from my teeth after I suck your marrow? Ember's breath singed my hair and burnt my skin. Its mouth so large it could swallow me whole, should it choose. Rows and rows of sharp crystal teeth vibrated with Ember's rage, giving its voice a strange grating musical quality. I didn't know, I whimpered. Ember leaned close, hot breath slowly burning my now dry clothes. Oh. A cloud of ash swirled like a cyclone and Ember was small again. It scratched its head. Whatever shall we do? Can I hold it? Can I see it change to the thing that will end my curse? Ember snickered and looked at the dagger in its hand and offered it up reluctantly. It was surprisingly cool to the touch. I watched in amazement as it began to shift. It felt like a slug squirming in my hand. The gold oxidized and darkened, morphing into clay. It stretched out like a snake, swirling and coiling until I was holding a large vase. What? I don't understand. I felt dejected. The stupid thing was as broken as I was. It began to feel heavy and cold. Peering inside, I watched as liquid seeped from the inner walls. Ember shrieked a blood-curdling scream. Aquarius pitcher? I realized, in that second, what had happened. This was not the weapon to defeat my curse. This was not what would bring my dad back to me. But, it would indeed bring me back to him. In one swift motion I upended the still-forming pitcher over Ember. Its screams pierced the air like a tea kettle, high, angry, and wailing. More water than possible poured from the lip of the pitcher. I didn't stop until Ember no longer moved. I stepped back and looked at the carnage at my feet. Chunks of crystal and bone littered the floor. I kicked at them and spotted the tiniest ember still glowing. I was about to stomp it out, when the whole mess began to tremble on the floor. The fire in the pit blazed upwards into an inferno and a river of molten gold flowed my way. I ran through the cave, not realizing how deep I had wandered. The icy black waters were a welcome sight with the raging heat fast on my heels. Deep laughter rumbled through the cave, setting free cascades of sediment and stone to pelt me as I stomped through the water, trying to find the way out. Who has awakened me? Who has stolen from me? It was her. Ember's voice was barely more than a hiss of steam. She has stolen from us. Us? You are nothing more than my property, eternal flame. There is no us. The booming voice roared and echoed through the caverns, a million angry growls bouncing back and forth like the ripples in the waters around me. There was no opening beneath my feet. Had I mistaken a turn? The water hissed behind me and billows of steam began to cloud my already hindered sight. I gripped the pitcher in my hands so hard I feared it would shatter as I slowly turned to face my doom. Ember, barely smoldering, sat atop the shoulder of a giant beast made of slate and rage. Its gleaming amber eye glared down at me, the molten gold pooling at its talon feet gave it no pause. Which of my treasures have you deemed worth your life? Steam rose with the temperature of the water, hiding all but the glimmering eyes of the beast. The pitcher in my hands refused to change, nor did the waters surge within any longer. I gave it a shake, praying it would shift again. I see, the beast leaned down, his magnificent armor-plated jaws mere inches from my face. His hot breath smelled like campfires and ozone. And why does the Forbidden One require such a weapon? I need it, my teeth chattered in my head, whether from the warming icy waters or fear, I was not sure. I need it to break my curse. To get my dad. He turned his head and brought his eye to my face, gave a great snort and pulled back into the billowing steam. You can have it, but only if you truly understand it. Before I could hear the last of the grinning dragon's words, I was dragged beneath the water, the stone floor beneath my feet gone. Take her. Eat her. Taste her. Swallow her whole. The words swirled through my head as hands pulled at me once again. The pitcher squirmed in my grip, a slippery slug once again. It was everything I could do to simply keep hold of the damned thing. Struggling in the grips of the fingers that pulled, the water that chilled my bones, and the air that threatened to leave my lungs, I fought to save my life. The weapon was strangely heavy. I lashed out with it and felt it connect with something, one pair of hands scraping off skin on my arm as they pulled away. I swung it wildly in the water, feeling the swallows dodge as they pulled me this way and that. My thumb grazed a small bump on the thick shaft of the club-like weapon. I pushed it, expecting something magnificent. Instead, it clicked on. Light pooled around me in the murky waters as a collective gasp was heard in my head. Are you kidding me? A frickin' flashlight? I aimed the beam at the hands that still dragged me deeper. The voices hissed and I suddenly found myself alone, freezing, with my lungs screaming for oxygen. Bubbles rose from the dragon's lair below me, faint light flickered from above. The beam of the flashlight lit the reality of the underwater grave I floated in. Hundreds of skeletal remains laid in the muck, tangled in stringy lake sludge. Kicking with everything I had, I went towards the faint light above. I erupted from the surface of the lake sputtering and half drowned. I clutched the flashlight to my chest and floated on my back, trying to regain enough strength to get back to shore. I stared at the star-filled sky above me, the moon a sliver of a Cheshire cat's smile. What a beautiful night to be alive, I said to no one in particular. Soft breezes seemed to answer, leaving gentle trails of gooseflesh up my arms, stinging the scratches and burns. Reaching one hand up, I blotted the moon from the sky. Lake water dripped down from torn fingernails mingling with the blood of my wounds. With a great gasp I rolled in the water struggling to shore, and to whatever monsters the forest of lies hid within its shadows.